I have a very, very influential person in front of me over Zoom, a man called Mr. Patrick Moore, who is the director of the Andy Warhol Museum, which is based in Pittsburgh, the US of A. Thank you for your time, Patrick, and I'm looking forward to this in-depth conversation with you.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
So, what's it like being the director of the Andy Warhol Museum?
Well, it depends on the day, doesn't it? You know, in general, it's a great honor because our museum is about Warhol, but I think it's also about this kind of high point in American culture. I think that so many people around the world look to the 1960s in the US in particular as a time of extraordinary promise and experimentation. And Warhol was at the very center of that. So we have a big responsibility to make sure that we look to that legacy, but that we also keep it fresh and relate Warhol to contemporary culture.
In modern times, on things like Netflix, there is this Warhol Diaries, which is a documentary. And what I found very fascinating, unique, and also very, very special, thanks to AI and modern technology, we actually had Andy Warhol narrating it the whole entire time. Did you guys have any part to play in that as far as the mechanics behind the scenes?
No, that was the decision of the Andy Warhol Foundation, which is our close collaborator in New York City. But we were highly involved with the documentary as a whole. Much of it was researched here at the museum, and I was honored to appear in it. You know, you bring up this interesting point, which is that there was this AI-generated, quite mechanical in a way, quite robotic sounding voice that portrayed Warhol. And many people didn't like it, but I actually thought it really captured Warhol much better than an actor just sort of interpreting Warhol. And, you know, I'm sure there's a Warhol private voice, but then also the voice that he used in public. And for that public voice, I thought it was pretty great, actually.
Agreed. It sounded like the real McCoy, and it sounded like it was truly him. And I think if he was around, I didn't know him quite naturally, but from everything I've read and seen, he probably would have been proud. Would you agree, Patrick?
You know, the focus of that documentary on Netflix was really Warhol, not only as a private person, but his love life. So I think certainly he would have been proud on one level to have such an extraordinary audience because it's reached so many people. On the other hand, Andy was quite a shy person, and that was not perhaps the happiest portrayal of his love life. So he probably would have been thrilled and completely mortified at the same time.
Yeah, I resonate with that because listening and watching that wonderful documentary, I see what you mean. I can see his characteristics and some of the traits there. Last point on that, actually. Since that has been listed on Netflix and it's been very well received by different audiences worldwide, what kind of positive impact has it had on the Andy Warhol Museum as far as people coming in for the first time and kind of, dare I say it, discovering Andy's work for the first ever time because of that iconic documentary?
You know, a lot of people, when they think about Warhol, they think of, oh, he went to Studio 54 and he hung out with Liza Minnelli, and, you know, they have this quite glamorous, but, you know, in a way, rather superficial view of Warhol. And I think what that documentary did was to humanize him. And we get a lot of people at the museum who may be not regular visitors to a museum, not deeply versed in art history. And it gives them an access point to know Andy as a person, as an individual, especially one who shared a trait or a condition that many of us have, which is to have a hard time when they're looking for love. So I think that it did humanize Andy. And then, as with any artist, when you learn something about their personal life, you then start to look at their artwork in a slightly different way. You know, a lot of the work that we have up at the museum, for example, at the moment, relates to kind of love and sex and that era in New York City when Warhol was living there. So certainly if you were to come into the museum having watched the documentary, I think that it would affect how you saw those artworks.
So the museum was announced in 1989, I believe. It was then established in 1994. The building is very, very large, 88,000 square feet, I believe, over 7 floors. And the amount of stock inventory, original to a limited edition merchandise and film located in this building, which is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, US of A, is, well, dare I say, it's just colossal. It's just huge. Where would someone like me start if I came in there as a fan collector, someone that admires everything to do with Andy Warhol? How would the journey begin for me?
Well, first of all, the museum is in a former warehouse, so an industrial building that echoes the idea that Warhol had, which was that his studio was a factory for making art. So we've hung on to the kind of industrial feeling of the building where the museum is housed. And as you say, we have 10,000 works of art and up to 500,000 archival objects. So we had to figure out a path through that made sense to visitors who were coming and experiencing this maybe for the first time. The building is 7 floors, so we send you to the top floor, and then you're going to work your way down chronologically through Warhol's life, but also his artistic production. So on the top floor, you learn a bit about Warhol's family, his birth here in Pittsburgh into an immigrant family, what Pittsburgh was like as this incredibly rough industrial city when Warhol was born here. And then you just progress down through the decades. And you can look at it either entirely through the lens of the artworks you're seeing or through the narrative of Warhol's life. Once you get to the second floor, that's where we do temporary exhibitions. And you would find either a deep dive into Warhol. Right at the moment, we have an exhibition called Unseen, which is more than 60 Warhols that have literally never been shown before. Or we sometimes also select a contemporary artist that we think is somehow resonant with Warhol. An example of that is the Cause show that we have coming up in May for our 30th anniversary.
Interesting stuff. I mean, Cause is definitely a very formidable figure within the world of art and highly, highly connected. The Basquiats, the Keith Harings, Futuras, Andy Warhol, etc. So that sounds very, very exciting. And it kind of brings me to the point of how we, being a street art specialist gallery in London Mayfair, we've been going now for a decade, 10 years. And our background is with Richard Hambleton. Kind of indirectly, Hambleton is connected to Andy Warhol because of the connection that he had with Jean-Michel Basquiat. Clearly, we know from the documentary and also lots of publications, Mr. Jean-Michel Basquiat and Andy Warhol had a friendship and also collaborated a lot over the years. Your feelings towards Hambleton, what would you say about him?
Yeah, I think that he was. I think he was an incredible artist in the trajectory of pop art as much as street art. And, you know, many people think that pop art was an American invention, but it actually really began in Europe and in the UK. So I think that there's a long trajectory into which his work fits, and it informed and informs as much as Warhol or Basquiat or Haring where we're at and why there is such a fascination with artists like Cause, even into the contemporary culture.
Can you tell me a bit more about the collaborations with Basquiat and Warhol?
Yeah, we actually have a lot of collaborations between Basquiat and Warhol in our collection. It was a very special, very complicated relationship, a tender relationship, a real friendship between these two very unlikely friends. You have Basquiat, who's a young, straight, black, wildly talented, pretty self-destructive guy. And then you have Warhol, who at that point was in his 50s, white, gay, at the apex of the art world. And they came together to make a series of paintings that were shown at the Tony Shafrazzi Gallery in New York. You could argue the friendship came first or the artwork came first, but I think the two really developed at the same time. And they made a series of these paintings, more than 100 of them, and showed them at Shafrazzi, and everyone hated them, or at least the art critics hated them. And they said some very nasty things, including one review that referred to Basquiat as Warhol's mascot. So you can imagine that this proud, young, 20-something black man did not like being called Warhol's mascot. And it really, it kind of ruined the friendship. But the friendship was real. You know, we have notes in our collection, postcards from Basquiat to Warhol, where he refers to Warhol as sweetheart or honey. And this was not a sexual relationship, but it was a very tender friendship. The amazing thing is that after those artworks were made, those paintings, within a few years, both of them would be dead. Both of them would be gone. And people have said that Basquiat was kind of led even further into his addiction and downward spiral because of Warhol's death and the fact that they never were able to kind of resolve this conflict between them. You know, I think that Jean-Michel Basquiat's trajectory was pretty clear already, that as a person with a really severe addiction problem, he was on a path that was not going to be great regardless. But it's a very sweet and a rather sad story of these two wonderful friends who kind of came together and then they were gone in a moment.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the king of pop art. You have one of the street art pioneers that blazed a trail and allowed many others to come after him. Meeting, and it's like the stars are aligning. And I have heard a few people refer to it as, you know, Andy Warhol, don't want to use the word was kind of using Basquiat, but there might be a position to take where perhaps to keep things fresh, new and exciting, he liked to collaborate with the up and coming, you know, celebrity type artists, which Basquiat was definitely that. And equally from Jean-Michel Basquiat's point of view, maybe using the pedigree and the experience and the already successful platform of someone like this apex artist, Mr. Andy Warhol, they kind of needed each other in a roundabout way at that moment in time.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I think they used one another, not in a cynical way, but as you say, Warhol was able to shine a light on Basquiat, and through doing that, he got some street credibility, he got some relevancy in the contemporary culture. But, you know, I don't think that it was as thought out as that either. You know, I think there was a true kind of fascination with one another. And this was the 1980s, and it was my era of living in New York City, and it's a little bit hard for people to realize that the art world was a very small place at that time. You know, if you were living and working in the art world in New York, especially in the downtown scene, it was pretty possible to know everybody. And this kind of coming together didn't always have to be so intentional. It often just kind of happened.
Mm. So, 900 paintings, 2,000 works on paper, 1,000 unique prints, 400 photographs, 60 feature films, 200 screen tests, 4,000 videos, just to name a few items located in the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh. We're about to embark on a very exciting project. William John Kennedy, your initial thoughts, feelings and opinions about him, Patrick?
William John Kennedy, I think, more than any other artist, photographer, was able to capture the essence of both Warhol and, as you say, Indiana as well. Warhol was really hard to photograph. I mean, there are so many photographs of Andy, but he's quite guarded and shut down or shut off in those photographs. And Kennedy came up with a really brilliant idea, which was to see Warhol, to depict Warhol in relationship with Warhol's art. So in the series of photographs that you're talking about, it's not just Andy, but there's always a work of art from Andy, sometimes actually kind of positioned as sort of a sandwich board that Andy's wearing, sometimes as in the beautiful photographs of Warhol with his flower paintings. The flower paintings are still wet from the studio, and they've taken them out into a beautiful field of flowers, and they're photographing them. And in these photographs, I think because Andy's juxtaposed with his art, he kind of comes alive, and that they're much more vulnerable and tender than most of the pictures that you see of Andy. So Kennedy was really a terrific photographer, and this particular series of images have been so important to us that the image of Andy with the Maryland acetate is the central image in the lobby of the museum. It's the most beautiful, it's the most iconic. Warhol is holding up what's called an acetate, which is a transfer of an image, in this case, Marilyn Monroe, onto this material that then can be further transferred onto a silkscreen. In this image, Warhol is holding up this image, this transparent image of Marilyn, and looking out through the Marilyn image towards the camera, standing in his studio. So you have combined these two incredible iconic figures. Andy Warhol, who would make Marilyn Monroe even more famous, bring her to the attention of new generations, even more famous than she had originally been. And of course, Marilyn Monroe made Andy famous and continues to be probably the most influential image that he would paint. So it's this coming together of these two icons in one really beautiful kind of shimmering silver gelatin print.
It's a beautiful work. It's an important work. It tells so many different stories and captures a very, very important moment in time. I mean, you must get so many comments about it. Is it the only photographer you've ever chosen to have outside of Andy Warhol's own photography in the museum?
No, we have other photographers who did portraits of Warhol, but this is certainly the most prominent image in the museum because it's so enormous. And also there's a tendency of everyone to take a photograph in front of it. And also because the people who work with William John Kennedy's estate have been so lovely in allowing us to use these images to promote the museum and to promote projects. So it really has become kind of emblematic of the Andy Warhol Museum.
And thanks to Kiwi Arts Group, they donated the piece to you guys. Did you take any other images or limited editions from the William John Kennedy IP or foundation?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Kiwi was so lovely to us that they created a special portfolio that has long ago sold out, but it was an edition of all of these key images that were printed in a special way, in a special size, in a very special box. And they gave us a full set of the William John Kennedy images, which are in our permanent collection. So when you come to the museum, you'll see those Kennedy images appearing quite frequently because they're such a great way for us to explain Warhol's story.
And I believe that this edition is called the Warhol Museum Edition, which is really, really important with that title in itself, Patrick.
It was a very close collaboration, and Bill was still living at the time, so we had the pleasure of him being involved in it as well. You know, it was really thoughtful. We had some really beautiful essays that were published in association with the edition, and it was just a great experience all in all.
Talk about great experiences. The Versace mansion. I believe there was a launch of this work, and it was a really good and very successful event and evening. Take me back to that moment. What was that like?
This happened during Art Basel Miami, and as is typical with a lot of parties at Art Basel Miami, you really get thousands of people turning up. And I had not been at the Versace Mansion before, and I didn't realize it's actually quite small. It's not like having a party in a warehouse where you can just sort of cram thousands of people in. So there was an enormous response to that party. And I got to sort of stand outside and play doorman for a while and make sure that people who had been invited actually got in. But it was a perfect way to celebrate something relating to Warhol, because he was all about nightlife. He loved the nightlife and he loved parties. And that he really would have been thrilled with, to see so many people turn out for that party.
You said something earlier that I wanted to bring you back to, which was Andy Warhol was rather, at some moments, slightly difficult to record and take photos of. Picking up some of his characteristics on this documentary, there was a bit of hesitation, or he was a little bit cagey about revealing his sex and his identity. He was a little bit scared of the backlash that he may get. He was quite elusive with that. And therefore, a lot of the times that you would see him, it would kind of look a little bit stone-faced. But what William John Kennedy was very good at is getting some expression and excitement and even joy. I mean, that must have taken a not just skillful photographer, but someone that really was quite close and someone that Andy Warhol trusted.
Yeah, I think trust is the key word there. Warhol was this funny amalgam of a gay man who was entirely out. I don't think that Andy really kind of knew how to be in the closet, but he was also quite guarded even so. I think he was out in a rather campy way, but to really reveal himself as a gay man, especially a gay man who grew up in Byzantine Catholic Church, was challenging. And it was also a very different time. Certainly here in Pittsburgh, when he would have been very young, really, really challenging to be a gay man. But even in New York, in the 50s and 60s, we were kind of still in an art world that was really homophobic. So in that context, I think it was hard, especially at the beginning of his career, for Warhol to open up to somebody who was sort of trying to portray him, photograph him, be his friend. And clearly Kennedy succeeded in all of those. Those pictures, they really are revealing because they show Warhol, they show his ambition, they show his pride, the things that later on he would develop a public persona that kind of hid those more vulnerable qualities.
Mr. Eric Shiner was the former director of the Andy Warhol Museum, but he features in this short feature film, I guess you call it, William John Kennedy talking about the connection with Andy Warhol and Robert Indiana. Eric Shiner, what views does he have about William John Kennedy and what is his kind of take on the collaboration?
Well, as I recall, Eric was the director when those pictures were produced, when that portfolio was made. And I think Eric's views were pretty much the same as mine. We both really admired Kennedy, and we admired what Kiwi was doing with the Kennedy images, which was to produce them, to make sure they got out in the world, but at a very high quality, using the best printing process to make sure that those images were really treated with a lot of respect and care. So Eric and I always thought that these were important images and an important thing for the museum to be involved in.
I was going to touch on that, about the importance of this work, because we have to remember these are taken in a time where there wasn't the age of the internet, there wasn't the age of social media, it wasn't easily to research and find archives like this and important works. I believe collectors or anyone purchasing items like this, they're really investing into the history, right? They're owning a slice of history.
Yeah, they're, not only with the Warhol images, but with the Kennedy images, it really is a lens into a very different time. And also the way those images are printed, I think we've become quite casual in the digital age. I can see an image on my screen and then I feel like I've experienced it. a beautifully produced silver gelatin print in person is a very different experience than looking at an image on my phone. They are the same images, but the experience, the tactile quality of that kind of printing is quite special and becoming more and more rare. So I do think that the care that Kiwi has taken in making sure that they do use the best printing, that they're careful about kind of controlling the supply of the images into the world. We did do the premiere of the documentary at the British Museum. Everybody talks about the special relationship between the UK and the United States. But I think that it's really wonderful to see the fascination with Warhol in the UK. And I think Warhol was probably quite inspired by what happens in the UK more even now than in the US, which is this mixing together of fashion and music and the visual arts. You know, that's really kind of at the center of what Warhol was doing. And it was very unusual in the 1960s, especially for a serious painter to all of a sudden say, oh, I'm going to manage the Velvet Underground, and I'm going to also make films. You know, that kind of mixing of creative cultures, which is really, for me, a hallmark of British culture, is something that I bet really caught Andy's attention and something that continues to be very influential.
I've heard people refer to Andy Warhol as being the glue between different cultures and different skill sets, you know, fashion, music, art. He was the guy there to bring everybody together.
Well, he was, because he was unafraid. He was actually kind of insistent that he had to continue to change. You know, his filmmaking is a good example of that, because his fear was, oh, I'm having success now as a painter, and people are going to think that I'm just become this kind of boring painter and that's all I'll ever do. So he picked up a camera and started making filmed portraits of people. And so I think that Warhol really was one of the kind of people who was influential in saying to young artists, you don't have to just be one thing. You can do whatever you want to do.
Well, we're delighted, privileged and honoured to be not only speaking to you today, Patrick, but also about to embark and launch this project, William John Kennedy, very, very special photography images of Mr. Andy Warhol, someone that I believe has influenced the whole entire market, the art market, and specifically some of the artists that we represent. So it was really, really important for us to educate, inform, and to highlight the importance of these work. It's going to be a really, really well-received project here in London Mayfair. And I would love to see one of you guys come to visit the gallery. It would be lovely to even have you at the project, Patrick.
You know, I would love to come visit. Whether I get to have the pleasure of attending the exhibition, I definitely want to come see the gallery the next time I'm in London. It's maybe my number one favorite city in the world, so I try to spend as much time as I can there. But, you know, the vibrancy of London is really perfect for showing Warhol's work. You know, a lot of that work was made in New York, but I think it's very resonant in a place as exciting and young as London.
I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. You've been a star, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you soon.
All right, congratulations on the exhibition. I wish you all the best.